It's a question I hear all the time. What kind of PC should I buy for my dye sublimation business? And today we're going to go over some of the more confusing features like, the CPU, the amount of RAM, the type of hard drive, and all that you need to make it a good fit for your sublimation business. Because the computer you're using is probably outside of the printer and heat press, probably the most important aspect of your dye sublimation business, and getting the wrong one can be a real point of frustration. So with this video today, our purpose is to try to take away some of the mystery about CPU, RAM, and what all that means. It's also worth mentioning that in this video we'll only be tackling the Windows-based PCs, since my experience with Mac is kind of lacking. I don't feel like I'm qualified to give information on Macs because I don't know enough about them. Let's go ahead and jump into talking about the specs. When you say like Intel Core i5, that's the processor, and the best analogy I can think of as far as a processor is if you think about your computer like a restaurant, and how many cores and everything has. The cores are basically, if you think about them like separate kitchens, if you think about the threads like chefs, like the more kitchens you have, the more chefs that you have, the more stuff you can get made. If you think about that in that sense, for instance, like when you're comparing the i7 9700, we'll get an older one so you can see a bigger difference here. We'll go with like a 3470, an older i5. You'll notice that the older i5 has 4 cores, 4 threads, whereas the newer i7 has 8 cores and 8 threads. So that means you can have 4 kitchens running and with 4 chefs, so 1 chef per kitchen. Whereas over here you're running 8 kitchens and 8 chefs, so that's, if you think about it, you can get considerably more done with that. A lot of times it's not really necessary with what we do, but I mean that at least gives you a way to think about it in a in a rational way. Next up, we're going to talk about RAM. Usually for sublimation and anything graphic design, you're going to want a bare minimum of 8 gigs RAM to allow you, because Windows is going to take probably close to 3 gigs on its own without a question. And if you're using Google Chrome and Photoshop and your print software and all that, you can eat up that RAM pretty quickly. I usually like to see something more like the 12 to 16 gig, even 32 gigs of RAM. It's worth mentioning that you can always add RAM later, whether it's a desktop, laptop, or whatever. You can always expand the RAM. And the way to think about RAM is, if we're going back to the kitchen analogy, the best way to think about that is that's probably equivalent to the amount of counter space that the chefs have to work with. Like if you're baking a cake, you can be more efficient baking a cake with a larger countertop than you can with a smaller one, and you can also do more things with it at the same time. Another analogy that I think is clearer on the RAM is, I always call it the sandbox model. If you're thinking about kids playing in the sandbox, you can have more kids in a larger sandbox. Of course, you have kids like Big Larry, aka Google Chrome, that'll build giant sandcastles in your sandbox and take up a lot of RAM. Things like Google Chrome, Photoshop, a lot of those are going to use a lot of RAM. Whereas like your print spooler is going to be, a little toddler in the corner just with a shovel digging sand. So if you think about it like that, you can have a lot of big programs running if you have a lot of RAM. But say you have 4 gigs of RAM, that's that's going to be barely enough to get Windows open, and you try to open a 48-inch by 48-inch 300 dpi file in Photoshop, and you're going to have a bad time. Next up, we'll talk about hard drives and why they matter. You'll always want to spend the money to get a solid state drive. Everything will just run smoother and faster on a solid state drive. Your programs will open quicker. Your computer will boot up quicker. Windows these days is just not happy running on a conventional spinning hard drive. It just doesn't. It feels sluggish. It takes a minute or two to boot, whereas a solid state drive will have you running in a couple seconds. And overall, it just makes the experience way better. It's well worth the money. And you may be thinking, what am I going to do with all my files? And the answer to that is either just do an add-on spinning hard drive, like a 2 TB or something. For you could probably get one for $60 these days, and that'll be plenty for your data storage, what you're doing. All right, now let's get on to the recommendations. And the way we'll do this, we'll go from a good, better, best kind of thing. For the good recommendation, I couldn't find any laptops that I would recommend, but what I would recommend is possibly a refurbished office desktop computer with an i5, such as this Dell Optiplex 9010 with a 3rd gen i5, 16 gigs of RAM, and a solid state drive. Well, that checks all the boxes that I would be looking for. It also includes a Wi-Fi adapter if that's your thing. I always run Ethernet to my PCs. That's just me. And you'll think 3rd gen i5 is really old, and I mean technically it is. It's DDR3. It's just an older machine. But if you look at the specs versus a newer i5, we'll say the i5, the 9500, I think is the newest one. I mean the 105. There's about a 30% difference between the 3rd gen i5 and the newest i5. Granted, it also has 6 cores and 12 threads, but as from a performance difference, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, you can get all the data here at it's userbenchmark.com, and what it does, people run benchmark software and it reports it back to the main website, and that's where it gets all the analytical data. And you can use this to dictate whether or not it's worth the investment. And I mean, depending on how much you're wanting to spend, it may or may not be worth the investment. But if you were just getting started, just had one printer and a small heat press, this would actually fit the bill quite nicely. It doesn't have a dedicated video card. I don't know that you really need it. But if you take this and an external hard drive, once you start getting your files built up, I think it'll fit your need for several years until you get bigger and ready to upgrade. As always, I'll have the links down below to Amazon, and you'll be able to find them. And I'll try to keep them updated with newer links as well, because I know there's only a certain amount of these, and they'll probably run out soon. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and move to the second, which is the better. And in this I have the desktops and laptops in the better realm. This one, what I've decided to kind of as kind of a best fit for the middle ground. It's a 9th gen i5, 12 gigs of RAM, 512 solid state. It's basically a gaming PC, but I think it'll fit the need quite nicely. And it's right around the $500 mark, because what I wanted to do in this video is I want to do something as cheap as possible, around the $500 mark and the $1,000 to $1,200 mark. So this is what I selected for the $500. It's an Acer Aspire TC 885, and overall I felt like it would fit the need of almost anyone in the mid-range that's looking specifically for a desktop. If you're looking for a laptop, I would recommend the Acer Nitro 5 series. My only thing is, it's hard to find a 16 gig laptop in this price range. But I mean, 8 gigs is still adequate, and it's likely using one 8 gig, so you might could upgrade it. I'd have to check into that. It doesn't really say. It doesn't really say whether or not it has an available slot for RAM. But worst case scenario, you can always upgrade it for probably $70 to $80. I had to guess. But this will be a good fit for your sublimation business if you were doing a laptop. And for $599, it's hard to beat. It's hard to beat these specs. A 250 gig solid state, 8 gigs of RAM, and a newer i5 for $599 from a decent manufacturer. Let's see. So that's the laptop I would recommend. So we'll go ahead and move into the higher market. On the desktop, I would, at this point, it makes sense to start to consider building your own. That I didn't include in this guide because that would double the size of the video. But at this point, I really think building your own is going to be the best way to go. But I wanted to include this anyway. I found the Dell G5 gaming desktop. It has a 9th gen i7, 2060 video card, 512 solid state, 16 gigs of RAM for 12 right at 1250, which is right about the price range we were looking at. This will do pretty much anything you're looking to do. But still, you could build one with the same processor, same video card, same hard drive, probably 32 gigs of RAM for the same amount of money. You could just build it cheap. For the laptop in this price range, I have two different options. The Acer Predator, I think, is a good deal. It has the 9th gen i5. You don't really care about the 144 hertz display or the millisecond response time. It's a gaming function. But the 16 gigs of RAM, 512 solid state. Overall, it's a really good laptop for $1,100. And then here is another option from MSI, 9th gen i5, 16 gigs of RAM, 512 solid state. It's just a little sleeker, nicer, and MSI stuff's, in my opinion, better quality. So I think either one of those options, I think you'll be doing really good. A useful tool for comparing two processors or two GPUs or solid states or anything is called userbenchmark.com. You can plug in the two that you have, and it'll give you a comparison on the differences. And from the graph here, you can see that the i5 9400 only lags behind the i7 9700 about 8%. So you can use this to kind of get the best for your money if you're a more price conscious buyer. Alright guys, I appreciate y'all checking out this video. I hope I did a good job explaining all the different terminology and what you should look for in a PC for your die sublimation business. If you have any questions, just drop them down in the comments below. I usually answer those, usually same day if I see them. But yeah, I appreciate y'all taking the journey with me on this one. If you like the content and want to see more, just drop it a like. Drop me a subscribe, help your boy out here. But I appreciate it. Y'all have a good one.